The next lesson is lesson 10. It's about visual effects in Fusion, so this is a fairly long lesson. It's taken in 3 parts, kind of the introduction, composite, then we do a green screen, then we do a title animation. To begin with, you import a new project called Hyperlight. It's in the lesson 10 folder. When you double click on it, just go to the edit page, and clips will be offline. You want to go to right click over the master bin, relink clips for selected bin, and then you'll find your intro lessons and lesson 10 and just open it there and relink all the clips. In here you'll have 2 markers. You'll start on the first one and just click the Fusion page and explain that's how you get into the Fusion page. Here in the Fusion page you want to explain that you have 2 viewers that are used to show whatever you need to show. They're not source and timeline viewer. You have a time ruler underneath with the playhead. That's your only sense of time inside the Fusion page. You have a toolbar which shows you the most common tools. You have an inspector on the right hand side, and you have your node editor down here. You also have, you explain these 2 yellow lines here on either side of the time ruler. The time ruler, these yellow lines indicate the duration of the clip that came in from the edit page. You can see there are frames outside that. That means when you edited this clip into the edit page, you trimmed it, marked an in point around frame 12, and then marked an out point where this other yellow line is. But there are frames on the source clip that are longer, that are after the in and out point. As you drag the red playhead, you'll see little green specks that come up. Those little green specks are RAM caching. So unlike the rest of DaVinci Resolve's edit and color page where you cache to disk, Fusion uses a RAM cache, so it likes a lot of RAM. And these green lines indicate what frames have been cached. These numbers here, this is the first frame of the comp. This is where the yellow line is on frame 12. And then the last frame of this comp, that's where the yellow line is here. Over on the right hand side, this is the current frame. So if you want to go to frame 50, you just type in frame 50 and hit enter and you jump to frame 50. In the node editor, you have 2 nodes. You talk about media 1, media in 1 being the actress, the clip from the edit page, and then media out being what renders back into the edit page. And you have to connect back into the media out. So it's the only way that it renders back into the edit page timeline is if you connect right here with this yellow input to the media out node. Then we cover a little bit of navigation, holding the middle mouse and dragging in the node editor pans it around, and if you hold down the command key and scroll the middle mouse, you zoom in and out. Same thing happens in the viewer. If you want to pan around, just middle mouse and drag, or command middle mouse, zoom in and out. Also know that there's a little, like every viewer, there's a little bit of a little fit button if you want to fit it into the viewer. Okay. So then we talk a little bit more about nodes. If I want to see this media in 1 in viewer number 1, I press the 1 key. And if I want to see media out in viewer number 2, I press the 2 key. So 1 and 2, viewer 1, viewer 2, that's how you navigate around. And you see these little white dots down here. These are viewer indicators. The one on the left for media in 1 is highlighted, indicating that it's in viewer 1. We might want to rename these. The way you rename a node is right click over it, rename. F2 is the keyboard shortcut. I'm just going to call this actress. So now we have a node that's the actress going into the media out node. So what can we do with this? Well, anything you add in between the actress and the media out is the effect. So we're going to come into the toolbar, we're going to choose a color corrector node and just drag it over. When your mouse, not the actual white rectangle, but when your mouse hovers over that line, it turns blue. That's when you know you can let go. This is a common problem, people letting go before it's connected. So you might want to just have them wiggle it so they can see that it truly is connected. Now, with the color corrector node selected, you can go into the inspector and you can drag the inspector around. She's supposed to be in space, so we're going to make this a cooler shot like she is in space. So we'll just drag that color indicator towards blue. If we went back into the edit page right now, the effect is there. There's no rendering. You can see it needs to be cached. But you're all set and you can just continue editing, or if you want to go back into the effect, you just park on the clip and hit the Fusion page button again. So right now we're back in Fusion and we want to add another clip. She's supposed to be in space and she's supposed to have a computer screen over her. So we need to get a computer screen. And the way we're going to do that is use the media pool. Explain that the media pool is identical to the media pool on the edit page and on the Fairlight page. Here you have a HUD clip, HUD. heads up display. And if we want to grab that, we can just drag and drop it into our node editor. When it's in the node editor and not connected to anything, it doesn't do anything. It's not part of the composition. If you want to see it, I'm going to press 1 to see it in viewer 1. I can close up my media pool if I want more room. Here we have a graphic clip. You can see the checkerboard in the back indicates that it has an alpha channel. If you want to see the alpha channel, come up to the upper right and you can click on this color button to see the alpha channel. What's white is opaque, what's black is transparent. So we can click back and see the RGB image. Okay, I want to composite this. How do we do this? What we're going to do is we are going to come into our toolbar. I use these divider lines to navigate people. They're these little thin vertical divider lines. I'm going to say go to the second divider line. The first tool after that divider line is the merge tool. We're going to drag and drop it on the line in between the color corrector and the media out. When the line turns blue, you can let go. Then you explain a little bit about the merge tool, how the yellow is the background input and the green is the foreground input. So if we take this HUD, let's rename it HUD so we know what we're doing, HUD. If we take this HUD and we take the output of it and we drag it into the green input, we now have this computer screen over her face. Why? Because the actress is going into the color corrector, going into the background of the merge. The foreground of the merge, think of it as video track 2, is going in the HUD, is the HUD. And those are both getting combined and output back into the edit page. So you can see in the HUD, if you compare the HUD on viewer number 1 and viewer number 2, this logo here in the upper left-hand corner of viewer 1 is actually cut off in our composite. We'd like to get that back. So I'm going to add a transform node after the HUD. I'm going to select the HUD. And we'll do this by just dragging it out here off to the side, not connecting it to anything. If you want to insert a node in between two and it's just hanging out here, just hold the shift key and drag it over. When your mouse is over the line, it will turn blue. You can let go and now it's connected. And the same thing for extracting a node. If I want to rip it out, just hold shift and drag it out. So now you have the HUD going into the transform. The transform is going to do something with the transform selected. The controls are in the inspector, and I'll just scale it down size-wise. All right, so now you can see the HUD going into the transform, getting resized, and that becomes the foreground of the merge combined with the background of the actress and output. So it's just a flowchart of image processing nodes. All right, let's add more nodes. I'm going to stretch out my media out to make more room down here. I'm going to go into my media pool. There's a little bit of a glass JPEG here. I'm going to drag that over to the right of the HUD and press 1 so I can see it. I'll close up my media pool. I'm going to rename this. The shortcut is F2, so it becomes easier once you start using the shortcut keys. I'm going to call this glass. And I want to add another merge node. You can chain merge nodes together, so the output of this merge node will become the background of another merge node. I'm going to select merge number 1. Instead of dragging it, it can be a little bit easier if you just select the node and then come up to your toolbar and click on the node that you want to add after the one that's selected. So right now we want to add another merge after merge number 1. Merge number 1 is selected in my node tree. I'll just click on another merge and it automatically adds the second one right after the first one. Now I have a new input here, green input. Drag the output into the foreground, and now I have glass over the top. This glass doesn't have any alpha channel, so it's just like putting a layer on top of two other layers. We need to blend this in better. When the merge is selected, you actually have controls in the merge. One of them is an apply mode, and you might know apply modes by other names like blend modes or composite modes. And you can see if you click on the menu, you have screen, multiply, overlay, things like that. We're going to choose something like an overlay blend mode. You can see now we have some blending going on. It might be too strong, so we'll just drag the blend slider down, introducing more of the original composite and less of the glass. Just enough to make it look like etched glass, and that's about it. Now we want to create a vignette, and I would like the vignette to happen before the HUD and the glass get put on, but over her face, maybe after the color corrector. So a vignette is a brightness or darkness of areas based on a shape. So what we're going to do is select the color corrector, and we're going to come into the toolbar. We're going to go to the second divider and two tools before that second divider. If you hover over it, it says brightness contrast. We're just going to click on it. Because the color corrector was selected, the brightness contrast gets added directly after it. Okay, if we drag down the gamma, you can see it darkens the image, but we don't want to darken the whole image. We only want to add darkness around the edges. So we need to make a mask. And that's what this blue input that we haven't been talking about on a node is. It's an effect mask input. It masks the output of this node. So what I'm going to do is have this brightness contrast selected, go up to my toolbar. After the third vertical divider line, there's a group of 4 mask shape tools, a rectangle tool, an ellipse tool, a polygon tool, and a B-spline tool. We're going to use this ellipse tool, and all I'm going to do is click on it, and it knows since it's a mask, it connects into the blue mask input. With the ellipse selected, you have a circular icon here, a circular mask here. I'm just going to drag out the size and come into the inspector, maybe soften the edges a little bit. Now you can see it's opposite of what we want, so there's a little invert button, and we're going to click that. Now we have our vignette happening over these. The thing about the computer graphics is it looks a little bit harsh, like a computer. So I'm going to soften that up. First I'm going to add a blur. So we'll add a little blur and we'll just soften it up. You know, even just adding it to 1.5 or something like that would give us enough of a blur to soften it up and not make it look so harsh. But you can add some more tools. Not all of the effects are in the toolbar. If you want more effects, they're in the effects library. Here are under tools, these are all different categories that are only found in Fusion. So if we want to add like a different type of a blur, I'll come into blur. Since my blur here is already selected, whatever I add is going to add after it, I'm just going to click on the soft glow. Right? So now the HUD goes into the transform, it gets blurred, and then a soft glow is added to it to give it more of a, an illuminating look, a little bit more stylized. Let's add one more effect. Let's go, and after this merge 2, which is really the final composite, right? Let's come back up here into our effect library. They're all different kinds of effects. The tools are what's found, these tools are what you find inside of Fusion, but if I close this up, these open effects are what you find in the rest of Resolve, right? Like Resolve Effects Blur, this is on the edit page and the color page. You also see that you can have third-party plugins will show up here as well. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose Resolve Effects Light and just add this lens reflection to the end of my composite. And you can see I had merge 2 selected, so the lens reflection gets added after it. And here we can see, you know, some lens reflections happening now inside of our composite here. You have a lot of controls that you can do if you want to play around with it for a little bit. You can have people play around with it. And as soon as we click back on the edit page, that comp is already in the edit page, right? It needs to be cached, but you don't have to do anything else to it. It's all right there, and it works based on caching. The next thing is we step into a new shot, and it's the second marker. So that's just taking, the first part is just taking one clip, and you just want them to get used to mainly how to connect nodes, how to view nodes, and what a merge does, especially the yellow background input and the green foreground input. Now we're going to talk about this clip, this cut here in the timeline, which is the last shot under the second red marker. These are 2 clips. We have a green screen in the front, and you might want to select that green screen and hit D to disable it so you can see the background. And then we have this background on video track 1, right? And then undisable that video track 2 clip. I want to take both these clips into Fusion, but if I just hit the Fusion button to switch to the Fusion page, it only takes the top track. So I need to take both these tracks. I'm going to select them, right click. At the top of that menu, it says New Fusion Clip. So I'm going to create a new Fusion clip. It collapses these clips, and you can see now it's collapsed. They're still in there. This is just a container. It's like a compound clip. You might want to explain that these clips are still within the timeline. You just collapse them into a container. Now, when your playhead is over these 2 clips, you can go to the Fusion page, and you have 2 layers here. You have kind of video track 1 and video track 2. So media in 1, if I press 1, is the background. That's going to be video track 1. Media in 2, if I press 1, that is the green screen. So I like to organize them as if they're in a timeline, like one on top of the other or something like that, or like this. So now I know this one is my background. I'll view it, I'll rename it, and you can call it, space, whatever you want to call it. This one is green screen, F2, I'll call it green. There are no spaces in nodes, so you might want to use an underscore, green underscore, and just say okay. Now we have our space shot and our green screen. We need to be able to now actually get rid of the green screen to see through to the space in this window. So what we're going to do is select the green screen node in the node editor. I'm going to come up to my effects library in Tools. In Tools, you're going to come down to Matte. The main tool when you want to pull a green screen or a blue screen is called the delta keyer here. And I'm just going to click on the delta keyer. Now the green screen is going into the delta keyer, which is going into the foreground. It's always good to step people through the node tree. This is so different from so many things people are used to that it's good to explain what you're looking at. I'm going to close up the effects library just to give my viewers more room. So the way the delta keyer works, pretty simple. You have in the inspector tabs. You kind of use the tabs in order. The first tab is just to use to select this color. So I'm going to click and hold my mouse down on this eyedropper. It's not just a click and drag. It's click and hold the mouse down and then come into the shot and hover your mouse over this green screen, and then you can let go and you can see you already have a little bit of a comp going and you can see outside. The other thing you want to do is tell people that when you're doing green screen, you can't just look at the composite. You have to look at the matte. And we're going to load the matte by selecting the delta key and pressing 1 to load it in the viewer. Now you can see we're only looking at the green screen going into the delta key. There is no background, right? So it shows us a checkerboard. If we come back to up to our color button, we can click on it. Now we're looking at the matte. And you can see, if you don't know how to use a matte, pure black is purely transparent. Pure white is purely opaque. Anything that's gray is semi-transparent. And in this shot, you don't really want any semi-transparencies except really his face, which should be remain this kind of gray color. So I want to make sure I get rid of all this other gray here in the white. And you can do that using these other tabs. I'm going to skip to the third tab here, which is my matte tab. We're going to go right to the threshold. The threshold is a little bit different of a slider. It has two ends, the low threshold and the high threshold. The more you drag this low threshold to the right, anything that is a dark gray is going to be pushed to be purely black. So I'm going to raise that up a little bit, but not enough that his face goes away in that window. Now I'm going to come to the high threshold and I'm going to drag that to the left, and things that are lightly gray are going to be pushed more towards pure white. And you can see that gets rid of a lot of our gray areas in here. So that gives us a pretty good matte, just that alone, and you can see our composite looks pretty good right here. The only problem that we might have is this little button here that was also green, but isn't meant to be part of this shot. It's probably meant that there's going to be some other graphic that goes in it. So we would like to hold this out and say, don't key this. This is separate from this window. And you do that with what's called a solid matte. So I'm going to use an elliptical shape matte, and I'm just going to drag it into my node editor. And you can see it automatically gives me the shape, just like when we were doing the vignette. And I'm going to shrink this down right in the viewer, and I'm going to position it over this little circle. Now in the delta keyer, you can see there are lots of different inputs. So how do you know which one to use? You can hover over them and it will come up and show you which one, what the name is. But you can also hold down the option key, drag from the output directly over the name delta keyer, and let go of the mouse, still holding the option key. That's going to bring up a menu. You can let go of the option key, and now you can choose solid matte from the input. And you can see our solid matte here is changed, so it's no longer being transparent. Now when you add a solid matte, it automatically is set to replace it with a specific color. So what we're going to do is come into our inspector, and we're going to go down to the next to last tab, which is called the mask tab. And here you can say you can see it says a solid mask and replace mode, and it's going to say soft color. Let's just say use the source color. So now it just puts it back to the source color, and we know we might have to key that with a different keyer and composite it in a different way. All right, so that gives you some idea about how you can quickly key something. And again, back in our edit page, our comp is done, and we can move on to our next shot. This time what we're going to do is slightly different. We're going to go to the very first clip. This first clip requires a title since it's the first clip. And what we're going to do is start the title in the edit page and show how you can bring that over into Fusion to create more effects. So to begin with, what we're going to do is on the edit page, we're going to go up to our effects library, click on the titles category here, and the title that goes into the Fusion, not these top titles, but the last one down here called Text Plus, is the one that you can start in the edit page and bring over into Fusion. So I'm going to drag that template right on top of this clip, and I might even trim it so it lasts the same duration. Now with this clip here, this is a regular title in the edit page. We can just select it and go up to the inspector, and we can start using it here in the edit page. So I'm going to type the name of this film. It's called Hyperlight. And you can see we have all sorts of different text here. If you want to change the font or the typeface, if you want to change the color, you can do that. If you want to do more than just a solid color, I might shrink this down a little bit. If you want to do more than a solid color, you can click on this tab up the top here. It's the fourth tab in. It's the shading tab. This shading tab allows you to have a lot more control over the look, the colors, the outline, the drop shadow of our text. So here in the type it says solid. I'm going to change that to be gradient. Now you have a gradient bar with two color stops. The first color stop is the bottom color, and then you have a color stop at the top, which is on the right, which is the top color. So I might change this to be maybe an orange color down the bottom, and then we can maybe make it a lighter shade of orange up the top. So now we have some text, and it has a nice shading on it. You can add other elements like an outline or things like that. By default, up the top, you have shading element number 1. That's that white fill. If we change it to shading element number 2 and we enable it, this adds a red outline around this. Now we might not want to do that, so I'm going to disable that and go to shading element number 3 and enable that. That is a black drop shadow. So now we have a black drop shadow. If we come down to the bottom here of our inspector, there is a position control, and we can change it so maybe it's on the lower kind of left-hand side, bring it down a little bit, and you can control all the elements or aspects of this drop shadow here. All right. This is all done in the edit page, but if we want to make more effects with this, effects that come from Fusion, we can just click on the Fusion page, and you'll see it's not a Fusion clip, so it's only going to bring in the top layer, but we can animate this and add other effects on top of this. Right here, you can see the same inspector is available to us in Fusion, and you can bounce back and forth. So let's say we want to do something like add another effect here. I'm going to go into my effect library. Let's go into Tools, and let's go into the Effects category. There's a Raise tool there, and I'll just click on it. Here we have our Raise tool, and I'm just going to come into our Raise, and I'm going to adjust this a little bit. Raise works best when you have kind of a bright color in here. So what I'm going to do is increase the exposure. And now we have that typical raise look, and you can see if I animate this little control that's in the viewer, this is kind of a neat little thing to be able to do, and you can raise it up and down. And this animation is this center X and Y control here. So maybe I might want to do something like at the beginning of this comp, I'm going to have my control be at the bottom or at the top, let's say, and I'll come over into my inspector. This works just like it did in the edit page. If I want to animate this, I'm going to click the diamond icon. It's going to set a keyframe and set our auto keyframe, right? So now if I move to the end of this comp and either drag this up or change the Y parameter to drag it up, this is now the animation that we have, and I'll just back up, and you can see if we hit spacebar, it will play, and we have our animated light rays. We can also use other parameters here. So if I come to the beginning and I change the weight, you'll see the weight is actually like what's going to make those rays show up or not. So maybe at the beginning, I'm going to drag it all the way to 0 and make a keyframe. And then I'll come, maybe the playhead maybe about halfway through this comp. And then I'll raise the weight up to about 4 or 5, and then I'll go to the end and I'll drag that weight down. So now we have this nice little no raise, and as it comes up, and then it goes back down, and that's a nicer looking animation. Now, so far we've just been doing things that animation that we could do in the edit page, but in Fusion you have a lot more control over your keyframes. And the first thing you do is you have a keyframe window. This is more like tracks, what we're used to. It's usually squished over to the side, so you're going to want to come over to the upper right hand corner and click on the zoom to fit to expand these tracks. Now you can see the raise here has a little disclosure arrow. If we open it up, now we can see the keyframes, and if we wanted this weight to be shifted one way or another, you can just drag them back and forth. You don't really have to do much here in this window. You're just showing people that this exists, more like exposing them to it than actually doing anything to it. So this is how you can change timing. It's kind of like the keyframe track inside of the edit page. If I want to close my nodes, that's in the upper left-hand corner. Now I just have this keyframe track. If I'm doing animation, I might also want to see a spline track. And now my keyframe window and spline window are split. You'll have to explain over on the far right, far left, you have the header of the spline editor. You choose what splines you want to see. For instance, here's the center path displacement for the raise. If you want a smooth one, I'm going to drag a rectangle around these two keyframes and then just come down into this toolbar down the bottom in the lower left. The first button is smoothing it. So now we have a nice smoother animation for our light rays. Again, you can take this as deep or as light as you want. This is about as light as you want to get. You just want to expose people to the different windows and slightly a little bit about the controls, and that's it. Once you're done, you can click on spline, click on keyframe, go back to your node editor, and then we'll just come back to the edit page. And that is the example of what all we do in Fusion. You don't want to confuse them too much. You just want to get them aware of the window, similar to what we do in the Fairlight page. There are other classes they can take if they want to dig in deeper.